This is a test. This is February 20th. Okay. You're Representative Rochelle Chronister, and you've been in the House for how many years?
12 years.
12 years.
Starting my 13th session.
Oh, goodness, I didn't realize it had been that long.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a series of questions here. I'm going to ask you about your service in the House and about your yourself personally, too.
Okay.
Kind of a combination. Kind of set up here. Okay, we'll start out by asking you, I know you're a Republican, why you're a Republican, and how long you've been registered as a Republican.
I have been registered as a Republican ever since the first time I voted, although I started my early life believing I was a Democrat.
Oh,
absolutely. I have had a grandmother who was very, very interested in politics, was an active Democrat, lived next door to me, and did her very best to raise me as a Democrat and a Methodist. She succeeded on half of it. I'm still a Methodist, but after I finished college and about the time that I was first married, discussed at length basically some of the philosophy of Republicans at that time and Democrats at that time, and that would have been the mid-60s. Well, maybe a little earlier than that. I think probably about the time of the 60s. I'm trying to think whether I was able to vote in the 60 election. I couldn't vote the first time I was eligible because my parents had moved to Chicago. And so the first time that I was eligible to vote, I was not able to get registered and vote because of difficulties with students at that time. I don't think that'd be a problem now. So the first time that I was able to vote was probably 64. And I registered as a Republican at that time, basically because of the more conservative philosophy that I felt I represented and what I was interested in.
Now, your parents, though, were Democrats?
No, my parents were Republicans.
But it was
but they were never vocal.
Partisan type.
Yeah, about what it was. My grandmother was very vocal about what it was that she was. And remember when I was growing up listening to the political party conventions on the radio with grandmother, for instance.
Well, it's interesting. It seems like people do have someone who convince them one way or the other. Early years in life, probably, about this. Your first time you ran, can you describe your election a little bit, why you decided to run?
Well, actually, I spent 10 years first as a school board member, so I had some experience, although actually, in my situation, you don't really run for the school board. You kind of put your name up, as it is in many small towns.
And what school district was this?
The Neodesha School District, 461, yeah. And the first time then that I ran, I had the person who was previously in this position call me and say he was not going to run for re-election and ask that I run. He knew that I was very interested in politics and that it is something that I thought I'd like to do sometime. I told him at that time that I didn't think I wanted to then because my children were... That was in 78.
Okay. You said you didn't want to run that.
I told him I didn't think I wanted to, and because of my children were... My son was... he was a 5th grader at that time, and my daughter was... let's see, she would have been... 8th grader, I guess. 9th grader. She was a freshman, and I didn't think it was... I thought I wanted to wait until they were older. Fred said to me, if you don't run, somebody will run who will go and stay. And this may be your best opportunity for an open seat. And we talked about it for quite a while, and visited with my family and decided that I could do it, and so I ran.
I see. So you did go ahead then.
Yes.
What point did you make that decision to run? What month was it, for instance?
April
of
78.
Close to the deadline in June.
Yeah.
What kind of a campaign did you run that time? How did you run?
Well, I'd been active in politics for a long time. I started in when Bob Dole first ran for United States Senator, which was 22 years ago, and was about 10 years at the time that I first ran for the House. Had been active in Republican politics with candidates, and also had been a vice chairman and a county chairman and active in Young Republicans. So I had some background in what it was that was going on. But I did not have any opposition within my own party. The Democrats ran a man against me who was a farmer and an older man, and spent the first 6 weeks that I was running saying, answering questions about what was going to happen to my children, what did my husband think of this.
Really? In 78.
Yeah, in 78 they were still asking that of women, rural women. There weren't very many rural women at that time, especially not from southeast Kansas. Now, there may have been in the past, but from southeast Kansas there were not. Once we established the fact that I was not deserting my husband and children, my husband approved of this. I had family, and my aunt had been my babysitter forever, and she was going to be taking care of my children when I was gone. Well, then it got to be okay.
Well, do you think this played a factor, having children that age? Do you think there were some people maybe that helped them decide to vote against you? Or?
It could have at that time. I don't think it does now. But I think, the question was, of course, raised. But I talked about it up front. And I think that once we got past that, then they kind of quit asking that question. My opponent, I know, tried to use that, not in the open, but he tried to use it in a sub rosa, more or less, type of a situation. But probably what was more of a problem was the fact that my district is a very agricultural district in many ways, and I have no farm background. But I also talked up front about that. I told them I hardly know one indica cow from another. And if I go to but I told them basically my experience and expertise was in the education area, that 60% of the state budget goes into education, and I think that I can represent you well in that area, and I expect you to help me when it comes to agricultural issues.
That's like what you had
so
to say.
our conversation has been good.
What other issues were prevalent as far as being interesting to your district at that time, 78?
I think probably the educational issues were of the greatest interest at that time.
What educational?
K through 12.
Okay.
As much as
Public
anything.
education.
Public education.
Funding, I assume, of public education. Who were some of the people that encouraged you to run this first time, and probably kept on encouraging you in your other elections?
Well, the person who probably encouraged me the most to run was the person who was in the position at that time. He wanted very much for me to run. He felt that I could beat about anybody that would run on the Democrat side. And that, and my family was very supportive. I have a good close group of friends who have always basically said, whenever it's time to stuff envelopes and write labels and, do all of those kinds of things, we'll be available to help. So I've had good support. I've had very good support within my community.
Oh, that's good. Any family members particularly that were helpful or encouraging in this first election?
No. Interestingly enough, my father was really not really encouraging. My father had always been a backer of anything that I ever wanted to do, frankly. He was in favor of it. But he had a rather poor opinion of politicians, and he wasn't at all sure he wanted his daughter becoming a politician, but he didn't try to stop me because he knew it wasn't doing good. He raised a rather strong-minded daughter.
Did your children and husband help you campaign?
To a limited degree. My husband's a physician and is not, number one, not interested much in politics, and is a single solo practitioner of family practice in a small town. So his encouragement is mainly saying, yeah, go for it, kind of thing. My kids have helped often in elections. My son's always been more interested than my daughter has been. And he's helped pass out information and campaigned with me more than she ever did, really.
And you've had quite a few campaigns, too. Have they all been pretty much the same?
They have not, any of them, been very difficult campaigns, really. I have had only one person within my own party run against me, have at times had a Democrat and other times not had. This campaign was probably the closest, probably as a result of the fact that I was state party chairman, for one thing, and told them up front that I would not, that frankly I was not going to campaign in my own district. I had,
so that, you think, made a difference?
I know that it did, you know, and they were ready for me to come home. They wanted me to come home and pay attention to them, and I knew that, but there was enough latent goodwill to get me through this campaign. I won't do it to them again.
Well, in your other campaigns before this one, what kind of strategy did you use? Did you go door to door?
Oh yes. When I've had an opponent, I have always gone door to door. I've done some mailings. I always do some newspaper ads. Very limited radio, although if I had ever felt like it was a very serious challenge, I'd probably done some radio. Never done any TV. TV just doesn't work real well for state legislative race in my area.
How did the media treat you? Did any of the newspapers in your district endorse you? Or?
My newspapers have always been very supportive. All of them have been. As a matter of fact, I've had endorsements by any of them that do endorsements. One of my opponents has never been endorsed by any of my papers.
That's interesting. How did you finance your campaign, especially your first one?
First campaign, part of it I financed myself. My first campaign was a very inexpensive campaign. I can't remember what I spent now, but it wasn't very much. Initially, as a matter of fact, I may even have filed an exemption. I may not have spent over the $500 limit.
My goodness. That's highly unusual, I believe.
Yes, but part of it was a very deliberate decision on my part, because I am a doctor's wife. And I did not want to give the impression of buying my election. I made a decision to run a very low-budget campaign with a lot of footwork instead, and shaking hands and having material to pass out, not using a lot of direct mail. We weren't using really a whole lot of direct mail in those days, as a matter of fact. So that was still the time when it was mainly go out and shake hands and eyeball people.
Postage didn't cost me as much then, if I remember either.
I don't know what it was, but it would not have been as expensive.
Change-wise. Did anyone in your family precede you as far as holding an office?
In elective office? No.
No, on either side of your family?
No.
That's interesting. Now, your district is, you live in the other state. What is the district? You said mostly rural. What percent rural, and how would you describe your district?
My district is made up of 2 complete counties and part of a third county. That's been both before and after reapportionment. The county has changed. Where I went north before, I go south now into the third county. There are 4 major towns in my district, and when I say major towns, that's from 1,500 to less than 3,500.
So they're pretty small.
So they're pretty
major
small,
towns,
really. Yeah, and then a number of towns that are in the range of 150 to 500 people, probably. So it's a pretty rural district all the way around. But interestingly enough, Neodesha, which is my hometown, also, and where I was born and raised and graduated from high school.
Oh, it is your...
Oh, yeah, the whole bit.
Good.
Is also an industrial town. We have a great deal of industry. We were an American oil refinery town for 70 years. They pulled out in the early 70s. And, we, at that time, put together an industrial park where we now, if we are fully employed in that industrial park, which is made up of about at least half a dozen industries ranging from The largest one probably employs in the neighborhood of 300 people to some relatively small, under 50. But the town itself has an industrial base of up to 1,300 jobs. Yeah. So it's for the size of the town, which is 3,300.
Employment right there.
It has a high industrial employment.
So what are issues that are important to these people then? The industrial people, the industrial employment group in the rural areas. What issues?
Economic development has always been an issue that many of my people have been interested in. More to simply see that we do not create additional barriers. Highways, hot issue, always been a hot issue in southeast Kansas, and remains so, very much so. The school finance formula is also an issue of concern in southeast Kansas because we are wealth poor. And all of the districts, well, maybe not, but nearly all of the districts in that part of the state are receive probably at least 60% of their budget from the school district finance formula. So those are all always issues of concern. Higher education is frankly a lesser issue of concern.
You don't have any with
them. I have no community college within my district. I now have the president of a community college in my district, but in the past I've been one of the few southeast Kansas legislators that didn't have a community college.
It's different. So did you focus on those issues then in your campaigns, or did you focus on any issues that
a lot of my campaigns have always focused on constituent service, communications with the district. That's always been one of my strongest points, and is still.
Now, during your years here, are the same issues remaining constant? Have other issues crept in and out of the picture as far as what major issues?
I've always said that the legislature is inclined to go up and down in their interest of particular issues. For the first several years that I was here, K through 12, elementary, secondary education was a fairly high priority issue. That in some ways was replaced by some of the economic development issues. In the last few years, higher education has been the focus of the legislature. Taxes and taxing policy is always a focus. The lottery and liquor by the drink and racing, those kinds of things have been in and out as side issues. The abortion issue was more of an issue last year. I believe it will continue to be probably in the future.
Are related issues too. Well, now you mentioned abortion. Are there issues that have been seen in the past and maybe still are seen as women's issues? Has this changed, or how do you feel about all that?
I think that there were issues that were seen as women's issues. I think that that's not probably as true today as it was initially. People assumed that your interest was going to be in education, that your interest was going to be in public health and welfare. When I came to the legislature, my interest was in appropriations in the budgetary process, and has remained there.
Now, is that because of your district that your interest was in that, or?
No, that's been a personal
interest, okay.
And I think also the fact that the appropriations process touches on all parts of government, and I've always been interested in the entire government structure.
How, if you could label yourself, I don't like labels, but it seems that there's some use, at least, in labeling yourself. Would you say you're a conservative, liberal, or combination, or what?
I'm probably a moderate conservative. In many ways, a fiscal conservative and more liberal on social policy issues.
Okay, good. As a freshman legislator, when you were coming up here, now you had the former person who'd been in office for several years. Did you have any other methods to help you out and help you get assigned to the committees you wanted and that sort of thing?
I don't know as I could say to help me get assigned to the committees and such. As far as mentors, I did have a mentor. Dr. Carlos Cooper, as a matter of fact, is the person that I considered to be a mentor of mine. He was the person who helped me learn how to really get a bill through the process. You know, and would keep saying, well, now there's something else you can do, Rochelle, if you really want to. You know, we can do this, and we can do this. He's also the one that told me to sit in the seat and keep my mouth shut, which was real valuable. And for a freshman, that's good advice, especially. Dr. Cooper was always very helpful, and I really appreciated it. And still calling and asking occasionally for advice.
What committees were you appointed to your first session here?
Local government and education committee, first session. I was trying to think whether I had I don't remember whether I had a morning committee or not, but those were, that was the two committees. I think those were the two committees I was on first session.
Now, did you remain on those committees, or have you changed quite a bit?
Oh, no. No. Local government I considered the end of the world, punishment for all of my sins. It was not something I was terribly interested in. Education I was interested in, but I only served 2 years on that, and the speaker asked me to go to public health and welfare and serve as vice chairman of that committee, which I did. And then the next 2 years after that, moved to the appropriations committee. Have also served on governmental organization, economic development, computers, communications and technology committee, a wide variety of committees. I've never done the energy committee or federal and state affairs, but I've seen a number of the others.
Describe your leadership positions. You mentioned you were assistant.
I was assistant majority leader.
Majority leader, but I mean of the committees too.
In the House, I've been vice chairman of the Computers Committee, of Public Health and Welfare, and Appropriations.
Were you the first woman to hold that?
Yes,
those
I was.
Positions? Seems like maybe you were.
I was.
Can you describe the State House power structure during the 13 years you've been here now? Has it changed? Has the function of the Speaker of the House changed, or the way things get done changed?
I think the function of the Speaker has, the power of the Speaker in many ways has probably declined. I think it's been in decline for maybe as much as 20 years. Part of that being that as the average legislator understands the system better, has more access to information, they are empowered more. Where at one time the Speaker and the Chairman of the Appropriations Committee and a very limited number of people understood how things worked and had access to information. As more legislators have that kind of information, the Speaker's power has lessened in many ways.
That's interesting, really interesting. Did you participate in any formal, informal coalitions or groups? Did you, for instance, I think of last year, there was what they called in the newspaper called the Women's Coalition. Did you participate in that?
I've never been much of a group former. I frequently attend meetings with women's groups. Never was really a steel magnolia, and I certainly was never a rebel. I'm inclined to play it within the structure.
What bills have you introduced and sponsored? I know there are several, but can you name a few of the more important ones?
Some of probably the most important legislation that I dealt with were economic development issues.
But your district
was good for the district, interested for the state as a whole. Probably the one my district was most interested in was a deer bill.
Oh, really?
Yes. That's another one of those things that you wish you never had to carry as a fish and game bill in the Florida House. Everybody has something to say about fish and game bill. That was probably one of them my district was most interested in the early days. Since that time, the economic development issues have probably helped make the biggest change in government that I think has been
Do you have any particularly vivid memories of victories or defeats in legislation that you've sponsored or worked towards?
Oh, let's see. County health legislation. Present Congresswoman Jan Myers, who was a senator at that time, she and I were going kind of at the same direction, or the same aim from different directions. Jan's pretty slick. She taught me a lot, mainly to stay out of her bill. In a friendly way, though. But we were able to get the county health department funding passed. But I have some rather interesting memories of that. Also had a bill one time that it was an economic development bill, matter of fact, that I carefully ushered all the way through the process and got it sabotaged at the last minute by one of the Democrats in a manner that I couldn't do anything but let it pass that way. So that's one of those things that happens too, that you remember.
Do you have any funny, humorous incidents that you recall that happened to you?
Oh, golly, I should have, but I'm not really very good on remembering some of those
things. Sometimes they don't pop right in the mind. As a legislator, what do you feel like the main focus of this job is? What do you do that's the most important, and what do you think it should be the most important?
I think the most important thing that I have always said was to try and help people in my district understand what it is that's going on. Try and keep them informed on what it is the legislature's doing, and to let them know also what it is that I do, how it is that I can help them. Has always been one of the focuses of what it is that I hope I do.
That's interesting. Now, you've been in the legislature long enough that you realize that there's been such a huge change in the number of women. And we've done a little quickie study on the numbers. And in 1975, it seemed like the trend changed. Prior to 1975, there were never more than 4 women in the House at one time. Since then, there's been a growing number every year. But you were there during that period. Can you make any comments on that? Why do you suppose 1975 was a turning point, and why did these things change?
I think part of it was when I was growing up, the assumption was made that you go to college and get married and you have children and you stay home. That was in the 60s. In the 60s, everything changed. The world in many ways changed in this country. Women decided that it was no longer necessary for them to simply stay home if they could afford to. And women began to develop their own careers. They began to say there's something more out there that I'd like to do. I think that a younger group of women started coming to the legislature. I think that many times, I'm just simply thinking the women who were here.
Yeah, well, you can remember that, yes.
The women who were here when I came were nearly all close to retirement age, I would say, or in their 50s. Anyway, maybe not as old as
their families were grown if they had them.
Yeah. When I came, that had begun to change. And I think that women no longer believe that you have to wait. Where sometimes women had come before they were married, in the very early days. We kind of went through a period of time when a woman would think she could leave home. Now that's no longer true. Interestingly enough, there are, I think, 4 women in the House pregnant right now. So that's going to be a very interesting situation when we have next year some very tiny babies as we get into the legislative session. So I think that the sudden freedom that society had finally said, Although even at the time that I first ran, they questioned me about going off and leaving my family. That very shortly became something that didn't happen.
In future elections, you would say that being a factor
was
at all.
Never a factor. And I think is seldom a factor at all anymore.
Do you think that the women's effectiveness in the legislature has changed since you've been here? Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say so. And
how and why?
I say that because even when I first came to the legislature, people watched me. I think that at the time that I came to the legislature, I lost my train of thought.
Okay, I was asking you if the women in the legislature were more or less effective and why.
Right. When I first came, I think that women were closely watched, and that a woman was still an object of an unusual object, and that you had to work exceptionally hard. I think that's no longer true. There are enough women that women aren't allowed to be themselves, to make the progress that they can without having to prove and reprove themselves. That's in the same way that men are now to some extent.
That's interesting for you to say that because you've been here and witnessed this. And this is true for you then. You think that the expectations of other members of the legislature have changed.
Are beginning to even out.
I think there were 35 women.
Yes.
And now there were like 6 or 7. How many were in the House?
Might have been 8.
I believe there were 8 by 7.
Seems to me like there were maybe 4 Democrat and 4 Republican women. It's been real interesting because the numbers all the time I've been here have been almost even.
And we haven't looked at that yet.
Side. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
They've been almost even.
Well, do you think it could be, from your experience, the fact that women were running for office before 75 and just not being elected?
No, I think that some of them were running in the preparatory offices.
Okay.
I think that they were just beginning to become mayors. Go ahead. I think that they had been school board members now, some of them for a while, although at the time that I became a school board member, which I was for 10 years, there were very few women school board members. But by the time I left that position, maybe 20% were women. Now, I would guess it may be as much as at least half, maybe more. So, as women began to learn that they could win elections, that they were no longer simply were the person who was to stuff the envelopes and help out, that they could actually win the elections themselves. Then they started running for the next level of offices. I think that theory
sounds real logical.
It holds true all the way across the country. I don't think that's just Kansas.
Now, are you involved with any national groups of women legislators, or isn't there an organization?
There is an organization. There are a couple of organizations of women legislators. I am not actively involved with them. I will sometimes attend a meeting, that kind of thing, but I'm still a party person in many ways, more than I am.
Well, you've had your
separate.
Yeah, you've been busy with some of your party.
And I think that the fact that I've always been actively involved with the Republican Party has maybe prevented me from doing some of those other things.
I see. Yeah, well, your time constraints too. Certainly important. Now I want to ask you a few questions about yourself, and let's start out with the organizations that you have participated in prior to being a legislator. Did any of those sort of prepare the way, you think, or lead you into the job, being a school board member? How long were you a school board member?
Almost 10 years.
10 years. So you were 2.5. You've been elected 2.5 times, or 4-year terms?
4-year terms. Let's see. The first time, I think that I ran. think I ran 3 times. The first time I was appointed when they appointed a 7th board member.
Okay.
I can't remember what I ran twice or 3 times.
Well, but that would be, you have big budgets and money and school finance. And
I became assured that I could deal with the budgetary issues. And as well as, I was a school board member, I served on a number of different kinds of educational committees, including one that was a statewide federal advisory committee. It was a very interesting committee to serve on. It had a lot of interesting ideas presented to it as far as education was concerned.
Well, let's go back even a little farther. Were there any organizations that you belonged to while you were growing up, in school or out of school, that you think might have led you into?
It's kind of interesting because I'm a microbiologist, actually.
Oh, really? I didn't know
I never
that.
had a political science class in my life, to be real
So your education is in science, not...
Yes, my education is in science. I've always been interested in politics, but I've never had any really formal kind of education in that line. But I think, frankly, that when I was in high school, I was very involved in the Science and Science Project. Did a lot of public speaking.
Oh, you did public?
Yes.
Related to science?
Yes. Yes. At that time, we went through the time, that was about the time period when we were busy trying to catch up with Sputnik. And we did a lot of science project kinds of teaching where I had 3 years.
Okay, go ahead. You were telling me about some speaking.
Yes.
That you were doing.
What was required of me basically was that you do a project using a scientific method, and then you write the report on it, and then you make a public presentation. I happened to be lucky enough to be selected to make some of those locally, statewide, and nationally. So I had a lot of experience at that time in public speaking.
Was this the science fair projects that we used to have?
Yeah, sure was.
Did you debate in high school?
Didn't debate, really didn't have time to debate in high school. I was a Westinghouse Science Talent Search Scholar.
I see.
And went that route, which I always kind of thought it'd be fun to be a debater, but really didn't have time to do that.
No, you couldn't do both of those things, for sure. Well, did you go on the nationals then and win scholarships? Did you go to college then in microbiology?
In microbiology. Worked for the chairman of the department, as a matter of fact, from the time I entered college. And was set on a career as a microbiologist until I decided to get married. And married a medical student and worked for the Katie Med Center as a microbiologist for 3 years. Eventually moved back to my hometown, and my interest had always been in research. It had never been in being a medical technologist. And, there's no call for research microbiologists.
In the other shade, I can imagine that. Yeah. Well, I mean, that was all you were really prepared to do then by your education was microbiology.
Yeah, really.
Do you think you'll go back into that? Do you have any desire in the future?
No. There's no way I could become a microbiologist again at this point. It would require me going back probably for 4 years, let alone.
Well, tell me a little bit about yourself when you were growing up. What were you like as a young girl, and what was your family like in the Watershed?
I'm an only child. Grew up, though, in a family that my grandparents lived right next door to me. One set of grandparents right next door. The other was about a mile away.
Which one was the one that was converting you to being a Democrat? Next door?
The one that lived next door.
Okay.
Right. Lived a very typical kind of what we think of as being a very stable childhood, no real traumas in my childhood, good student, always pretty successful in what it was that I did, headed a lot of organizations along the way, that kind of thing, terrible in sports, could hardly walk across the room without finding some way to trip one foot over the other.
Of course, girls weren't in sports.
No,
as much, in competitive sports.
Yeah, they really weren't. was never the cheerleader type.
I see.
So,
now, did you belong to organizations that, for like Girl Scouts or 4-H or
all kinds of Girl Scout and Pep Club president, and I sing. I've done singing groups and one thing or another.
And your performances would prepare you somewhat.
Played the piano, I should say. Haven't played the piano in years. Those kinds of things, and acted in plays, and a general hand, which is probably good political training.
You mentioned your dad wasn't real enthusiastic about your running for office. Was your mother still living? Did she?
Yes.
Well, how did she feel about that?
It was all right by her. She didn't. She figured I was probably going to do whatever it was I decided to do anyway.
Well, and that becomes very personal when you're running from their hometown, so to speak. So all their friends.
Well, they were not involved. Now, my father would never actively oppose anything, frankly, that I probably wanted to do. He would never do it. My father's no longer living, my mother is. But it was just like he could hardly believe his daughter was going to do this kind of thing. What is my little girl going to do getting involved in this nasty, nasty world of politics? And my father was a fairly sophisticated man. But it was just something that he really didn't really want to see me do, that he accepted.
Well, that's great. How old were you when you were first elected to office?
39.
39. That's right in. There's a little age bracket in there. We're kind of finding a lot of people were.
Well, that was when I was first elected. I was about 29 when I first went to school board.
You were 29 when you really got involved in public service.
And I was 39 when I first went to the legislature.
Well, it seems like between 37 and 47 are the ages that all the women anyway are that we're interviewing. Not all of them, but a lot of them. How has your being in the legislature, how's it affected your children?
It has made my children probably more independent. It has it forced their father to become more of a part of their lives when they were in high school.
Because you don't drive back and forth from the other state every night. You stay here during the session.
They kidded me. After I went on the Appropriations Committee, I have laughed and said I was a long-distance mother. Because basically I called my kids every morning about 7:30, quarter to 8 in the morning, usually about a quarter late after I went on the Appropriations Committee. Our subcommittees meet at 7 in the morning, so I was in a subcommittee meeting at 7 o'clock until usually after 8, and the standing order was with George Teagarden, who is now, a matter of fact, chairman of my Appropriations Committee. George would look at his watch and would say, "Rochelle, it's a quarter to 8," and I'd get up and go out and make my phone call. It was always interesting, too, because my daughter is 4 years older than my son, and so she was driving by the time I became a legislator, and my daughter was probably typical of most teenage girls. Never got up in time. I had too many things to do getting ready.
Oh, dear.
And my son got up early and got himself dressed and organized and downstairs and ate his breakfast and watching the Today Show. And I would call him and talk to him, and he was also a very typical boy. "Hi, how are you? What are you doing?" "Watching TV." "What's happening?" "Nothing." I'm, just like pulling teeth. Get my daughter on the phone, who was, of course, always behind. Never had enough time to get everything accomplished. Could tell me in 30 seconds everything that was going on in town. Catch me up on what her brother had been doing and hadn't been doing. And what it was that she and her father were doing, and Aunt Ruth had been here or had not, and one thing or another. Probably with a hairdryer in one hand and the telephone in the other. So it was always, but it did. I think that it made my daughter particularly much more independent. My son was probably more grown up, although he was the younger child.
Now, how old again were they when you were first in?
11 and 15.
You were 11, so she was 15 driving, yeah? Now, who was it? You said a relative helped you? Your aunt. Is it your mother's sister?
My mother's sister, my mother's younger sister, who was a widow, and who had basically always been my babysitter. She basically was a town babysitter. She'd been babysitting for quite a long period of time.
Do you think there were sacrifices your family has made for you so you could be in it?
Yes,
what kind
I
of
think
things
it probably was. There were times when I could not be there. Although, if there were any kind of a major crisis, of course you can be there. I mean, you just simply say, I'm leaving, and you go home.
How long a drive is it to the legislature from here?
About 2 hours and 15 minutes.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah, and there were times when I tried to drive home for many of my son's basketball games, particularly during his senior year. They had a basketball team that went state, matter of fact.
My goodness.
So
you did want to go see it.
Oh, yes. I drove to Hutchinson every day. After we finished session in the morning, crawled in the car and drove 3 hours or whatever it is that it takes to get to Hutchinson. Then watched the basketball game, turned around, drove back, and did the same thing the next day.
Well, do you think that they're different? What were the advantages then for your family that happened from you being in the legislature?
I think that it forced both of my children to take more responsibility.
Both of them. And that's really the main thing. What about your husband?
Really
do you think he's...
I think he's much closer to his children than
what do you consider to be the main contribution to the state as a legislator? You've done many things. You've been involved in a lot of other things, really, even almost outside the legislature through the party. What do you consider to be your main...
I'm not sure I've ever thought about that one.
Well, it's a hard question. It really is.
Main contribution.
Well, what would you like for it to be?
Probably my economic development activities have been the thing that I have seen that makes the biggest difference. Formation of what was not, but now is Kansas Technology Enterprise Corporation. Basically, Mike Meacham and I put together what became the Centers for Excellence in the Research and Marching Grant Program.
That's an important thing.
That's probably one of the early activities that I had in county public health service as an area. Now, maybe probably my corporation's up there.
Do you think that being in the House has changed you as a person?
Oh, absolutely.
In what way?
Much more confident, although I never lacked self-confidence. Frankly, I'm still much more confident. Able to talk to about anybody. You could make a speech at the drop of a hat, or the drop of somebody who sit down and listen.
Do you think that the political role of women has changed over the 13 years you've been here?
Yes, I would say that it has.
And you talked about the different expectations. What else has changed about it, do you think? I mean, is it the way the women see it? Is it the way other people treat them? Or what?
Probably both. I think a combination.
Do you think they're more effective yes, because of numbers or just...
to some extent because of numbers, but also because of the work of the charity. The fact that nobody considers it to be an unusual, that's the biggest accomplishment. It is no longer unusual for a woman to be successful in the legislature. And I think that's important for women.
It's probably important for everybody, right? Yeah, that's good. Is there anything I haven't asked you, I should have asked you, you would like to tell me in this interview?
I would say probably that nearly every legislator is saying we fall in love with the process. We enjoy the people. At least 99% of people who are legislators are very good people who are not in it for their own benefit. Most of them, frankly, mainly the men, probably lose money being a legislator. It's certainly not a job that you get rich at. You have to have some sense of doing it for public good. I think people form very close friendships. And it's amazing sometimes what we know about each other and what the interests are.
And you keep those friends forever, probably.
I think probably so. And probably the fact that my attachment to the House is very strong. I've never had any interest in being a senator. I've had a number of times when Senator Thiessen had said to me, you know, I want you to become, and I'm going to lead and do something else, for instance. And I said, Dan, I don't want to do that. I like being a House member. It is boisterous. It is noisy. It is nearly total chaos. And it is a lot of fun. Senators are really inclined to be a bit too stale for me. They kind of consider themselves to be senators and politicians. So I think that would maybe be what I would say, just love of the process.
Good comment, statement.